Vikings and democracy. What's the deal? Thing is, the Vikings had a thing. And here, the main thing in the fjords, the western fjords right here, was just down there on the other side. It's called Ting. And we still have a thing, we call it the Great Ting, Stortinget, in Oslo, in Norway. On Iceland, it's called Althing, Althing. And this was basically people getting together, voting, deciding on something together. And each person from each household had a say. So if the man died and the woman was left in charge, it was her who had a say. And this is 1,000 years ago. And this is more also. And I'd like to say something about this, and I'm going to break it down two ways for you. One is a little bit controversial. I'll do that one afterwards. It's more like a theory, a hypothesis. The other one is more factual because there's been a lot of research on that. And how could Vikings have exported the concept of democracy? Did they even have democracy? Well, sure, if you look at their laws. And right down here at the Thing, they had some really, really old laws that had been orally told at the thing. And there were many smaller things, and this is one of the bigger things. Getting together, settling disputes, and they had a law sayer, of course, who knew all the laws by heart and was really well regulated. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the export, the way they used to vote like this. Because the Vikings took this with them wherever they went. All right? We have so many Ting walls and everything. If you go to Liverpool, for example, in England, at the Wirral, you have Ting walls, Ting mounds all over. And also on Isle of Man and all around the Irish Sea. But wherever they went, they took this concept with them. And it's when what's most interesting is the ones who went down to Normandy and became Normans, because the concept of Norman law is something that after the year 1066 with William the Conqueror, when this Norman became the first Norman king of England, that's when the concept of Norman law, stemming from the Viking law and the Ting system, was amplified in a large way. Because you had something called Magna Carta, which is a living document all the way up to into these days, actually. But before that, also, you had a Charter of Liberties from the year 1100, which is also something from the Normans, and the concept of habeas corpus, which means he who has the body, meaning an individual can state a case to a court of law if something wrong has happened, if there's been any wrongdoings. That's kind of interesting what these Normans, these Vikings from Normandy, took with them into England. And we know that this, especially the document of Magna Carta, inspired a lot of the thinkers in the 17th and 18th century, especially Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Common Sense, right? And Thomas Jefferson, of course, who was present also when not only the Declaration of Independence, she co-wrote, right? But also he was present in Paris when they wrote the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right? And it was again amplified, this whole concept of the liberties, universal liberties to everyone, was again amplified, not only in the 18th century, but by Napoleon and his armies, the tricolor, right? Liberté, fraternité, and égalité, the liberty, brotherhood or fraternity, and freedom, equality and freedom, right? I'm trying to get that right. And that was actually amplified in a way that even here in Norway, it returned back to us in a sense, because we didn't have it so well under the Danish. But in the new constitution in 1814, as well as in the new constitutions all over Europe where the Napoleon armies went, it left a lasting legacy on the concept of the universal human rights. So here I'm trying to draw the long lines going back from the Vikings and the whole concept of the early democratic origins. But I'm going to tell you something. I want to go even further back. I want to go backwards in time now, because this is a little bit well known. Many of the Normans, the Vikings who became Normans in Normandy, in present-day France, northern France, the barons there had a lot to say. I mean, this pyramid of power, right? It wasn't that steep as we know in later times. They have a lot more to say, and that's the whole charter of liberties I talked about in the year 1100. That's what they took with them, right? So the whole precursor to the Magna Carta. But also peasants under the Vikings in Normandy had a lot better conditions and better rights than all over the rest of the continent in Europe at the time. And this I have from some very distinguished professors, German historian, especially this one guy. And it's a very interesting concept to look at law in this way. But now I want to go even further back in time. I'd like to say a few words, and this is more, I guess, a hypothesis or a theory. Because if you look, I'm going to give you 3 different time periods before the Viking Age. And if you look at the Germanic tribes, and if you look at the laws they had, and you know a lot of their laws, they're so similar to the Gulating law just down here. The Goths, the Lombards, they were called the Longobards in this time of the Germanic tribes when they conquered the Roman Empire, right? And not only the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, but the Frankish law codes they had also, and many others. And this is something we can go even further back in time and look at. It was the whole concept of meeting up as a thing system, and each person has a say. And it's like the Vikings who came to Normandy when the Frankish rulers, soldiers actually came to meet this one Viking ship. This is a famous story. And they said, we need to speak to your leader. And the Vikings who are aboard a ship on a river, right? They said, you have to talk to all of us because we're all leaders here. And that's written in the Frankish sources, right? In the Frankish annals. And if you go further back in time, this is what the most famous archaeologist in Scandinavia does, Christensen. He talks a lot about the new research that we're finding now. And I totally support that. We see that the tribes, the chieftaindoms, and the kingdoms, the early kingdoms, which was, they were pre-Viking. We see that they now go much, much further back in time than we knew, even back to the Bronze Age. So I'm going to show you a map right here and now. And on this map, you will see the Germanic linguistic migration out of Scandinavia. And this is the very late Bronze Age and the early Iron Age. You can see, of course, this is migration of peoples all out of Scandinavia, and they brought with this, with a strong clan culture, they brought with them their early concept, the democratic concept of the Ting system, basically. And it's very similar to Greece, and that's where I want to point the next. And this is where the theory comes in, right? This is a hypothesis. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But have you ever wondered why the Norse mythology and the Greek mythology are so similar, right? It's kind of weird. And I've always thought about that until I learned how much in the Bronze Age, in the Nordic Bronze Age, how wealthy Scandinavia was. So now we've been in the Germanic tribes, right? And in the late Iron Age, we went back into the early Iron Age and late Bronze Age. It's another time period to look at the migration out of Scandinavia with the expansion of the Germanic tribes, right? And then we go even further back into the time. Now we're back before the ancient Greeks. We're even before the time of when Homer wrote his, like the Odyssey. But we're actually in time of the fall of Troy. That's the time, that's in the Bronze Age, the Minoan Greeks. We know because the extensive trade networks that they had to have in that time, because the way you made bronze, with all the different materials, you needed to, I mean, they sent their daughters, the elite sent their daughters 350 kilometers away. I'll put the paper down here so you can read about it. And they got beds, pearls and stuff from Egypt up to Denmark, for example. We know that the people in Scandinavia had strong ties with the Minoan Greeks at this time. And there was a lot of trade coming out of Scandinavia because of all the fur and we don't say tusk, I mean, but, well, yeah, maybe we do, but, amber, of course, the amber root, which was also popular in Roman times. So we had a lot of things to trade, and the thing is, something happened here, because we're talking about the early stages of democracy. People say it came from Greece. Sure, we had a similar thing in Scandinavia. It's very similar to Greece. What happened there? And actually about the same time, and we know a few centuries beforehand, they had a lot of contact, and they probably intermingled, because we know they traveled back and forth. This is before Pytheas and these old Greeks traveled north and wanted to see up here how it was, but it's not very much before. And people knew about each other. They were smart and well connected and wealthy, and they traveled. Oh, they did. So I guess more research needs to be done on this before I draw a straight line from far back into the Bronze Age and down to the ancient pre-Greeks, Minoan Greeks, up here to the Viking Age and Ting, and then straight up here to the great importance of liberties that we cherish, especially in the West, like freedom of speech. And this is what I'd like to share with you, to tell you that I seriously believe the Vikings, their greatest export was their concept of democracy, and that each person should have a say.